Good morning. I'll call to order the regular meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is November 6th, 2014. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee, and I'm joined by colleagues Councilmember Goodman, Andrew Johnson, Councilmember Warsami, and I believe Councilmember Reich is on his way. We have six items on today's agenda. I'll start with the consent agenda. If you're here for either of the public hearings and would like to speak, you can sign in with the clerk, or we'll just ask at the time as well. On our consent agenda, we have item number 3, which is a rezoning for Hampton Inn and Suites at 2812 University Avenue Southeast from C2 to C3A to allow for a new hotel there. Item number 4 is approving a petition submitted by Cedar Cultural Center to vacate the street and sidewalk easement on the 400 block of Cedar Avenue. Item number 5 is approving a petition submitted by Seward Common LLC to vacate excess street right-of-way where 22nd Street East was recently reconstructed. And item number 6 is staff referral for a zoning change regarding household refuse collection placement as we're getting more waste options with single sort recycling and now composting coming. Our ordinance needs some changing. So I will move items 3 through 6 on our consent agenda. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, nay? Those items carry. Returning to our public hearing items, item number 1 is 2215 Snelling Avenue, considering the application submitted by Seward Common for an interim use permit to allow a doggy daycare there, and we will start with staff.
Good morning, Chair Bender and committee members. I will give a brief presentation this morning just on this, and I can answer any follow-up questions for you. The property that is before you this morning is 2215 Snelling Avenue. It's the parcel that's shaded here at the corner of Snelling and 22nd. The application is an interim use permit, which is otherwise known as a temporary use permit through the city, and we don't see too many of these coming through the process, but it is an application that skips the Planning Commission process, and then it's something that the City Council can approve for a period of up to 5 years. And it also has to be an application that meets the conditional use criteria that we have in the zoning code. So the application is a doggy daycare boarding facility. As it's defined in our zoning code, that's an animal shelter. The property is owned I-2. It has 2 overlay districts, the industrial living overlay district and the PO. It's about 27,000 square feet in size in the Seward neighborhood group, and then policy guidance on this site is for transitional industrial. In this specific circumstance, the applicant currently is located across the street at 2206 and 2210 Snelling Avenue, so these parcels here. And this area, of course, being transitional industrial from a policy guidance standpoint, these 2 parcels have already been redeveloped, and obviously there are 2 new buildings that are constructed, and that's part of the Seward Commons redevelopment project. This is part of the 3rd phase. The vacation that just went through the process was for a portion of 22nd down here to be included as part of that redevelopment. So in essence, the applicant went through the process to establish the animal shelter on this property in 2010. It has operated in the building since. And of course, now that this site is being redeveloped as part of the 3rd phase of the Seward Commons, they need to move. And so they're proposing to move to a property that is owned by the same property owner, and the property owner likes to put uses within these warehouse buildings that are predominantly vacant during the interim periods before the sites are redeveloped. So this would be a similar situation. The applicant is requesting up to 5 years. We are supporting that application this morning. It is likely that that 4th phase of the Seward Commons redevelopment will kick off in the next 3 to 5 years, so it could be a shorter period of time, but it didn't make sense from a city perspective or from a staff perspective to support a lesser period of time, just given that it could happen between 3 and 5 years. So there's a time increment there. So again, we are supporting the application. I won't run through all the findings unless you'd like me to, and of course that approval is conditional on the interim use terminating in 5 years from the date of today. So I'll close there. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay, seeing none, I'll open the public hearing. Would anyone like to speak on this item? Would anyone like to speak?
And the applicant is here if you have questions too.
Okay. Any questions for the applicant? Okay, seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I'll move approval of the interim use permit for item number 1. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? And that carries. Okay, item number 2 is at 2300 Milwaukee Avenue, considering an appeal of one condition of approval from the Heritage Preservation Commission's decision of a certificate of appropriateness regarding the porch. And we'll begin with staff as well.
Good morning, Chair Bender, council members. My name is Lisa Steiner. This is an appeal of one condition of approval for a certificate of appropriateness approved by the Heritage Preservation Commission at its September 23rd meeting for an enclosed side porch replacement and deck above. The appellant is the applicant. Just some property background. The subject property is located at 2300 Milwaukee Avenue. The home was built in 1883 and sits on an approximately 3,000 square foot lot. The 2.5-story home has about 2,900 square feet of finished space. It is a contributing resource to the Milwaukee Avenue Historic District, which was placed on the National Register in 1974 and designated locally in 1975. The existing side porch was built in 1979. It's approximately 80 square feet in size and sits about 7 feet 6 inches from the property's southern side interior property line. The applicant is proposing to demolish that porch and replace it with a larger enclosed porch, about 137 square feet in size, with a second-story deck above. The proposed porch would extend to 3 feet 10 3/4 inches from the south property line. So related approvals to note, so in 2001, a similar porch design was approved by both the HPC and variances were approved at the Board of Adjustment. However, the project was never implemented in both the heritage preservation regulations and the applicable zoning standards have been amended significantly since that time. Another approval to note happened in July of 2013 for the property immediately to the south of the subject property. A certificate of appropriateness was approved for a very similar side porch with deck above. The HPC placed several conditions on that approval, including a requirement that the addition be set back at least 5 feet from that property's south interior property line. So the approval of a certificate of appropriateness for an alteration in a historic district has 12 required findings to analyze a proposal based on, including the criterion period of significance, the designation study, the impact on integrity, the district design guidelines, the Secretary of Interior standards, the preservation ordinance, and the comprehensive plan. The preservation ordinance also gives the HPC the power to impose such conditions on an approval of a certificate of appropriateness as it deems reasonable and necessary. So in analyzing the application for the certificate of appropriateness, staff looked a lot at the National Register nomination, which notes the uniform separation on lots of buildings on Milwaukee Avenue, the modest and similar forms of buildings on Milwaukee Avenue, and the relationship of closeness with the spaces in between. So in the Sanborn maps from 1930 and 1952, you can see this uniform separation on lots pretty clearly. Most of the properties were close to their northern property line, leaving a larger southern yard. The subject property would not have historically had a side porch and would have had about a 12 or 13 foot setback on their southern lot line. The home itself, just to note, is only 23 feet wide. The lots are indeed small and have narrow side yards, but a side porch addition makes them even narrower than they were historically. Staff found, and the HPC concurred, that as proposed, the uniform separation of buildings on lots, the continuity of modest structures, and the relationship of closeness with spaces in between was not adequately maintained in the proposal. So if the proposed 8 foot 7 inch wide porch were to be reduced in size so as to maintain a 5 foot separation from the adjacent property line to the south, the alteration would be compatible and support the distinguishing features of the historic district. So with the recommended conditions, the new addition would also be compatible in massing, size, scale, and the architectural features of the property. So the action taken by the HPC was a 5-1 vote to adopt those findings and approve the certificate of appropriateness subject to the recommended conditions, and it's just the first condition that's being appealed today. So staff has received numerous letters of support for the appeal from neighbors and the neighborhood group. And then one of the issues brought up in the appeal and in a few of the letters received was the issue of the Milwaukee Avenue Planned Unit Development, or PUD. The general idea seems to be that, or from the letter, seems to be that the PUDs should essentially override the R2B zoning district requirements. I think there might be some confusion because other cities do planned unit developments differently than Minneapolis does. In Minneapolis, a PUD is not a rezoning of property. It's a conditional use permit. PUDs are subject to all the applicable standards, procedures, and regulations of the zoning ordinance and the zoning district in which the properties are located. So the conditional use permit for the Milwaukee Avenue planned residential development was approved in 1976. In reviewing the original documents from 1976, I couldn't find anything regarding side yard setbacks or exemption from zoning district standards. The purpose of the PUD, as listed here in the application, was to allow for the clustered parking areas in the open space and to set up the common maintenance through restrictive covenants placed on all the properties. So I don't want to get too into the weeds about this, but the assertion is that, from what I understand from the letters, that a proposal like this should qualify as a minor change to the PUD, and that would be approved administratively by staff. First, I just want to point out that an addition like this would likely not qualify as a minor change, especially because it doesn't meet the zoning district requirements. Secondly, to amend the PUD rather than to obtain a setback variance would be a substantially more difficult process for the property owner. For example, the application fee to amend a PUD is over $2,300, while the fee for a variance on a typical lot on Milwaukee Avenue would be about $400. So some of the letters received have noted that these types of changes used to be approved administratively, and it's only been in the last few years that the city's been requiring homeowners to get a variance. And in my research, I cannot find, or I'm not aware of, any administratively approved amendments to this PRD or administrative approvals for additions that didn't meet the zoning code requirements. So, and there's records from at least 25 years ago of properties on Milwaukee Avenue obtaining variances for improvements that didn't meet the zoning code requirements. In fact, all the properties on Milwaukee Avenue received front yard variances shortly after the PRD was adopted. So it could be that the additions that they're thinking of either met the zoning code requirements, or I'm not sure if perhaps people are thinking of our certificate of no change process, which is a preservation approval that's administrative. So over the last 14 years, we've approved almost 30 certificates of no change for alterations on to buildings on Milwaukee Avenue. That's administratively approved preservation work, but the scope's limited to minor alterations like re-roofings, the addition of AC units, or repairing siding. However, anything that wouldn't meet the zoning standards would still need a variance. And regardless of the PUD, heritage preservation approval is required for alterations because of the fact that they're in a historic district. So I wanted to address that because it was an issue brought up in a lot of the letters. But the issue at hand this morning is really about the Heritage Preservation Commission action and the condition that the addition, the proposed porch, be set back at least 5 feet from the property line. One more thing to address, process questions that were raised by the appellant. I just created this flow chart to display the process moving forward. So if the appeal is denied by City Council, the applicant would be able to apply for building permits if the project's redesigned to meet that 5-foot setback from the lot line. And then if the appeal is granted, they would still need to go to the Board of Adjustment to obtain a variance. And then there, if the board either approves or denies the variance, would determine how the project could be designed and built. So staff's position is that the decision made by the HPC was based on the findings for a certificate of appropriateness, maintaining a 5-foot separation between the new addition and the southern property line would be more compatible and support the distinguishing features of this historic district. So with that, I'll close and take any questions.
Any questions for staff? Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. That was a very good report. I have a question for Mr. Nelson. So today, really all that's in front of us would be to make it, if we were to, I want to hear the public testimony. If we were sympathetic and wanted to grant this is a simple question of a certificate of appropriateness that's in front of us now. So there's no hardship finding on a variance, correct?
Madam Chair, Councilmember Gooden, correct.
But then the next step would be to make the argument that there is a hardship in place which would require the variance, which would be a much higher standard to meet than the standard we might or might not be able to meet today. Is that correct?
Councilmember Gooden, you're correct. The standard now is practical difficulties and not hardship, but you're exactly right.
So it might be easier to move forward today, but in the end, they might not have any argument with regard to the variance.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for staff? Okay, we'll open the public hearing and then there'll be a chance to address anything that comes up there. So if anyone would like to speak, just come on up and we'll do it that way. And as you speak, please state your name and address for the record. We usually try to keep to 2 minutes or so, but there's not a lot of people who want to speak today, but try to stay, relatively brief to the points in front of us today, and then try not to repeat each other too much. Thank you so much.
Okay. Well, I'll start off. My name is Chuck Levine, and my wife, Lynn, and I live at 2300 Milwaukee Avenue. I never imagined when I started this that 13¼ inches would create this sort of controversy. But at the same time, I think that Milwaukee Avenue is such an unusual and unique place that a public discussion of what conditions apply is an important discussion to have. The transformation of Milwaukee Avenue happened more than 30 years ago, and kind of institutional memory can fade in that time. Fortunately, there are several people around who have firsthand memory of the situation. But in any case, just to go on with what I prepared to say, we deeply appreciate the fact that Milwaukee Avenue, as we know it today, is a miraculous place. It exists because of dedicated and knowledgeable people of vision and creativity, risk takers that were determined to see their vision realized. If not for the motivated young preservationists and the political activism climate of the 60s and the 70s, Milwaukee Avenue would have been lost to the wrecking ball. Lynn and I have loved living there for the past 31 years, and now we'd like to replace our deteriorated side porch with a new, more usable design. We have extremely limited space and a modest 13¼ inch setback. The relief we request is so we can have a table and 4 chairs inside the porch with enough room to walk around the table. The size that we selected leaves 6 feet between our house and our neighbor's house, which is the amount of space that's required by the building code to still have openings in the wall. And just for perspective, our request is 16 feet long and 13¼ inches wide. That's about 17 square feet. So the area under discussion is about the size of this table. Although we were approved by the HPC, the approval contained a setback condition, as you've heard, which we think is unreasonable. Staff will tell you that there's a precedent for the condition of a decision made on the neighboring house. I think I can show you that there are numerous other situations dating back 35 years that can lead to other conclusions. It is important to note that in 2001, we were approved by both the HPC and the Zoning Board of Adjustment, but we were unable to move forward due to financial conditions at the time. So a question for us is what's changed between then and now? And I understand that some things may have changed in the zoning code and some things may have changed in the way that HPC looks at conditions, but nothing's changed on Milwaukee Avenue, nothing's changed about our house, nothing's changed about the porch proposal. I think that time allows people to see things in different ways, but I don't think that invalidates the way that staff looked at it previously. We've talked with all of our surrounding neighbors, the Milwaukee Avenue Homeowners Association, Architectural Review Committee, and the Seward Neighborhood Group. Not only are there no voices in opposition, but everyone has written letters of support. Most notably, our south neighbor, who is most affected, has written 2 letters of support. You should have all these letters in your packet, including 3 that have come in the last few days. Since we've articulated our appeal in our appeal statement, I'll just summarize the 3 things that we think are the reason that we're here today. If the HPC is empowered to make decisions solely based on a setback question, why do we always also have to go to the Zoning Board of Adjustment? We're confused about the process, and if you read the hearing transcript, I think you'll see that the HPC and the staff were also confused about what the proper action was that should have been taken at the hearing. Second, if the HPC is not empowered to decide setback questions, we ask that you revise their decision by eliminating the setback condition and send us on to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. I'm not sure that I understand the dialogue that just took place about who's empowered to make these decisions, but that's really the clarity that we're here for today. And then thirdly, we do have an issue with the staff report just regarding the description of the effective zoning in the historic district. Even though you heard today about the PUD, the HPC didn't hear about that. There was no mention in the staff report of the PUD. So there are other speakers here, several other people who will speak to the PUD, but the fact of the matter is, I just want to put up a graphic about this. Okay, so here's the historic district. Every property in yellow has a substandard lot size, substandard being less than 5,000 square feet. Our particular property is 3,100 square feet. We're pinched. We completely understand that. That's the character of Milwaukee Avenue. There's one property in green which happens to be a larger property. That one actually exceeds 5,000 square feet. All of the properties in orange have an issue with the side yard setback. In the upper left-hand corner, the properties that are referred to as the workers' cottages, all of those buildings are about 2 feet from their side lot line. So in any case, you can see that almost every house has a side lot line issue. How did this happen? How is there actually legal? How are there legal properties on Milwaukee Avenue, if not for the PRD zoning, or the PUD zoning, as it's now called? So I don't think that there's been an adequate explanation of how this could possibly happen, and we feel like the decision that's being made by HPC is being made in the context of underlying zoning without any acknowledgement to the PUD, but yet there's no explanation for how the PUD sorry for tripping over my words here. We haven't heard a good explanation of how Milwaukee Avenue came to be and how it's legal, if not for the PUD. So we think the PUD has a lot more validity and a lot more flexibility to it than staff is suggesting here today. And again, none of this information was presented to the HPC and was not taken into consideration in their decision. Just a few pictures to illustrate. There's some other comments made here about the spacing of buildings, and I just wanted to illustrate. Is it possible to have that be less query? Well, this is the row of houses that our house is in. Our house is the second one with the red roof. Our porch proposal is set back 25 feet from the front of the building. It's not even visible. Then one other thing to illustrate, you'll see that and I'm sorry, if you could lighten that up just a bit. I don't know who's controlling this. Oh, okay, thank you. Okay, the area in green is the area between our house and our neighbor's house. And this is the front of the house. We have no impact going back 25 feet. And what the staff is saying is acceptable is what you see on the left-hand side. What we proposed is what you see on the right-hand side. The rectangle that's delineated in red is the amount that's under discussion. You can see that again in the elevation. Here's what staff is saying is acceptable, and here's what we proposed. And our position on this is that this is a negligible amount and should be allowable under whatever the zoning conditions are that are controlling Milwaukee Avenue. And then just two other pictures here, I guess here. This is the existing condition of our porch, and while you can see that the porch is a modest-looking porch, there's a 4-foot walkway along the side of the porch. This is the porch that we propose with the deck on the top of it. And then, excuse me, this is what staff says is acceptable. And you can see a little peek of the house that's behind. And then this is the porch that we propose. So just to conclude, we ask that our proposal be judged in the context of the existing PUD, not the underlying zoning. We think it is fair and reasonable considering the degree of substandard conditions throughout the district. We also ask that this be judged, that this condition be judged by those that are empowered to decide setback matters. There is one thing that was mentioned in the staff report that I would like to take issue with, and that's the statement that these buildings would not have originally had side porches. When my neighbor this summer built their new porch, a substantial amount of footings were uncovered that, of course, were not visible to anyone. No one really knows what was going on in these houses and what was built adjacent to the houses. But there is evidence underground that there are other things that are not apparent that were there. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions? Councilmember Goodman.
Not a question as much as I would just urge future speakers to not really focus on this PUD issue. I don't think that that's the bigger issue here. I just need to hear why this is consistent or historically consistent with this neighborhood. And I actually think you made a fairly good case by showing the very limited expansion compared to what would be allowed. So I would just urge you not to spend a lot of time, particularly Mr. Roscoe, lecturing us about the PUD, and focus on how it is consistent with the character of the neighborhood, which I think is an argument perhaps you are most qualified to make.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. And after the public hearing, we can have some discussion about particular tools that might be needed if we can have the city attorney kind of describe the differences of these things, and then there may be need for Councilmember Warsami to bring something forward in the future, an overlay district or something. But we'll continue with the public hearing for now. Okay, would anyone else like to speak?
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name's Doug Wise. I'm the housing coordinator for the Seward Neighborhood Group. And I had forwarded a letter, which hopefully everybody received. And so I don't have a lot to add beyond that, other than it's our position that the Heritage Preservation Commission is not really empowered to create side yard setbacks and setback requirements, and that is really a zoning provision. And the Heritage Preservation Commission, as did the Milwaukee Avenue Homeowners Association, which actually has a more restrictive design standard than the city does for the district, both found that the porch as proposed by the owner was consistent with the district and recommended approval of it. I'll just make one statement about the PUD, and that is that when the district was originally formed, the PUD was originally formed as shown on that drawing. Actually, I'll put it back on if that's okay. Oops, sorry. As you can see, hardly any of the lots and hardly any of the homes met setback requirements or size requirements for the lots. The reason the PUD was created was because it didn't fit within the zoning district as the zoning district requirements are established. And therefore, PUD is to grant additional flexibility that part of what was done as that flexibility is that in exchange for having the district setback requirements and lot sizes, you have common green space, which is actually the former street, which is now a mall in between the properties. And as a result, it establishes, in essence, a new standard that is consistent with the existing development and not necessarily consistent with the district as it was formerly or elsewhere exists. And that the PUD does give the authority to the zoning administrator to make minor changes to the district. And we could contend, as Chuck had illustrated, we're talking about an area the size of this table, which is probably less than 1/100th of 1% of the district as a whole, and to me would clearly be considered a minor change to the district. I'll just leave it with that. If anybody's got any questions about that or the letter I had sent, I'd be glad to answer them.
Okay, thank you. The next person then.
Hi, my name is Sheldon Maines, 2718 East 24th Street, and I view this as deja vu all over again. Back in 1978, I was the first president of the Milwaukee Avenue Development Corporation. I've been a shameless agitator for years, and working with a lot of the radicals who proposed this, it was when I first used the line, Seward is the only neighborhood I can live in and feel like a conservative. I am going to talk about the planned unit development because we spent a lot of time on it back in 1978, and it is, we thought, the overall document for this. The staff has said, well, rehab wouldn't have resulted in requiring a change in the setback. Well, all of these houses on the north side here and the rehab that was involved there was they were jacked up, all the brick was taken off, new basements put under, and it was put back down. That would have triggered an issue with setback. On the south half of that block on the north side, that four of those houses are new construction that would have resulted in a setback. So if the planned unit development did not impact the 5-foot setback requirement, how did we get those houses rehabbed? How did we get those houses built? I think the staff is totally misinterpreting the planned unit development, and I spent way too much volunteer time arguing with the housing authority over the details of that back in '78. As far as the neighborhood goes, the neighborhood views Milwaukee Avenue as a living historic district that has to be, changes happen so that people can live there. We have to make it so that people can raise families there, live there, and do things in a reasonable amount of time. Requiring variance, and I'm sure there have been variances over the years on things, but I think HBC and the Planning Department has gone overboard on what they're requiring and are not looking at the original PUD, and I don't even know if anyone can find that whole document. So I would urge support of the variance. I think it makes total sense. It allows this to be a living, thriving historic district. Thank you.
Okay, next speaker. And I think the one question I don't know that the speakers are really addressing is if you're arguing that a 5-foot setback is not necessary, are you arguing that there's a historic pattern of 3-foot setbacks or 2-foot setbacks or 1-foot setbacks, or what pattern is there? Or if you imagined every home to build a porch, what would be the, in your argument of the pattern that would be appropriate here?
Good morning. Good morning, Chairperson Bender and members of the Minneapolis City Council. My name is Bob Roscoe. My address is 1401 East River Parkway. I was an HPC very active member for 21 years. And I also was the lead planner for the Milwaukee Avenue 4-block area redevelopment. A former former HRA staff person, Bob Scroggins, who directly administered the area for HRA, his comment, looking at the counterculture people that live there and all these other crazy conditions that he fell in his lap, he said, Milwaukee Avenue has a perfect balance. The houses are close together, but the people are spaced out. So in 1972, HRA instituted the Seward West Project area, and it called for 70% of demolition. A lot of it due to housing deterioration, but a lot of it was what they call planning reasons, the very thing we're talking about today. Insufficient side yards, setbacks, property sizes, and so on. And that meant 70% of the houses in the neighborhood, including all of the houses on Milwaukee Avenue, and most of them in the 4-block area, would have to be demolished. By 1976, the Seward West Project Area Committee, that was the neighborhood group that had kind of seized political and planning control of the 4-block area, made an agreement with HRA that the 4-block area plan around Milwaukee Avenue could keep its non-conforming house and lot conditions in place. A replat at that time basically kept lot lines with minuscule adjustments due to correct lot dimension arithmetic. All in all, no houses were affected in any way. More to the point, this keeping of lot lines allowed a historic district to take place and flourish. Today, Milwaukee Avenue is a very unique place. Everybody has said that, but it really is. There are no problems. It's just a great community, and there's a great sense of self-government, which is what some of us on the counterculture leaning side at the time thought would be important. Real estate values are really improved by the development and probably would not achieve the value they have had the area not received its unique way of accepting non-conforming conditions. So I didn't mention those 3 initials there, but due to the small lots, livability becomes harder to come by at times, to make adjustments. History is the record of change, and we have to make incremental changes sometimes to it. And I think that, as Doug Wise said, a small bit of increment is something that should be rewarded, not restricted. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak in the public hearing?
May I speak to I would just like to speak to your question.
Oh, sure. Thank you. That would be very helpful.
One other piece of information about me is that I am on the board of the Homeowners Association. I've been on the board for 11 years, the last 5 years as president of the association. Even though there is a desire to come up with some uniform standards for our association, what we on the board have learned, and we try and apply very carefully, is that there is a huge amount of variation within the regularity. The houses may appear to be the same because they're all lined up together and the roof pitches all line up, but we have people on our association is actually this entire 4-block area. So all of these people on the outsides of the block, they all have street frontage. The people on Milwaukee Avenue don't. Some people are close to Franklin Avenue, other people aren't. We try to specifically answer your question. We try and look at each situation that a homeowner brings up individually and weigh its merits, both in terms of the surrounding properties and the individual situation. We try hard to not make any big decisions. We know we've got something special, and we don't want to mess with it by making too broad of statements about it. This particular version of the plan shows you what we actually deal with, because the orange is the historic district, as is the teal color, but the teal color is what's called the workers' cottages, and that's the That's the picture that you always see of Milwaukee Avenue. This is off of your website. That's the picture you always see is the workers' cottages. So we really have three conditions. We're over on this side of the street. This is a special, so I hope I'm answering your question that we just try and be careful to look at things. We look at it under a microscope, but we also try and stand back and make a broad decision. Does that answer?
Okay, yep.
Okay.
That's not how our zoning code works, unfortunately, but so I think we'll have staff respond to some of the things that have come up, and it may be that there is need to have some next steps conversations after today's hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to speak?
Hey, I just want to comment on your question too. And this gets to there's no consistency here in some ways. Most of those houses on the north side have 1 foot or less setback. These two houses are within 3 feet of each other. So it's not consistent, and that's what we were trying to deal with in being creative when we first developed the historic area and all the documents that went along with it, and I did not use those 3 letters.
Okay, thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Anyone else? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I think it would be helpful, Jason, Mr. Wittenberg, or Mr. Nielsen, if you could just sort of explain the underlying zoning, the PUD, and then I think the most important point here is what Councilmember Goodman brought up, which is that we have a different standard here today. So if we approve the appeal today, the next step is to go to the zoning board, and they will be looking at a different standard, which goes to our underlying zoning. And that's the question here. So if your neighbors want to do this, that each person is going to have to go to the zoning board of adjustment, and they're going to have to show practical difficulties, which is the standard for a variance. So that's why it seems to me there may be a need to make some policy changes.
Chair Bender, that's correct. And staff in their report and presentation really tried to focus on the historic district guidelines in this situation. And I guess the discussion has gotten a little sidetracked from that. But if there is an appetite among Milwaukee Avenue residents and policymakers to sort of revisit guidelines and zoning district standards here, we can certainly have an ongoing conversation about what those tools might be. But as staff indicated, we've found no indication that the intent of the original PUD was to sort of ignore zoning setbacks within the district. And we've found, variances dating back, I think she said 25 years. It's maybe worth noting that a planned unit development actually isn't even allowed in this zoning district any longer. So if we were to really strictly look at this as a planned unit development, then that raises the question of whether it's all non-conforming, and that could be a bigger can of worms than we really want to open if we are really going to go down the path of looking at this as that kind of planned unit development. But we're certainly open to moving forward from this, looking at what kinds of tools might offer additional flexibility if that's the direction we'd like to go.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to get the discussion going because I have a definite opinion about it, and I see a path in my mind, so maybe other people don't see the same path I do. I'm going to move to grant the appeal with regard to the issue in front of us, which is the certificate of appropriateness to allow this in a historic district, and I would like to comment on my motion.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, Ms. Steiner, I think you did a great job. I think you laid out exactly the position that staff and the HPC should be laying out. Here's the rule and here's how you have to follow it. And the reason we have an appeals process is so that we can determine whether or not that rule needs to be strictly enforced. So I think staff did a great job, and I appreciate your hard work, and I don't think you should take anything we say today as anything about your work or the work of the HPC in this particular situation. Historic districts, of which I lived in one, the Harmon Avenue Historic District, have a set of guidelines. They're not rules set in stone. And I would argue people who live in those districts care the most. about what the district looks like, and the city's job is to try to help reinforce when changes are made in that district. Sometimes people who live in the district want to make changes, others are more predatory and buy property and want to make changes. In this particular situation where we have a policy in the city about density and growth, and we want people to come here, we have to acknowledge that there are some historic districts that are not set up to allow for the kinds of growth and development of homes that we see. I mean, look at this drama we're seeing in Southwest Minneapolis about tear downs right now. So yeah, it's a historic district, they can't tear it down, but this is a very sensitive and architecturally significant change to this house that fits in perfectly. And we need to figure out, if our policy is to have growth and encourage people to live in the city, we need to figure out what process we can go through. Maybe there's a bigger process later to get from here to there. So on the issue of the certificate of appropriateness, it's a no-brainer. I'm a little bit more concerned about the variance issue, and I'm going to throw this out here and see what Mr. Nilsson has to say about it. I personally think we should grant them a historic use variance here today without any other process, under the auspices that it's consistent under a certificate of appropriateness, to get the variance, because it's in a historic district, to move forward. That would be my path forward. I am a little bit concerned that we would then, if we agreed to the certificate of appropriateness, then the Board of Adjustment, which is a citizens panel, is going to come back to us with another very strict interpretation, and we're going to be sitting in this same room $400 later, making the same exact arguments. I'm pretty strict about the rules, generally speaking. So I'm not someone who would say, do whatever you want in a historic district. I'm generally one of 2 or 3 people to vote with the preservation folks against everybody else moving forward. But in this situation, I think you made your case most clearly on the issue of what the size of the difference is. The illustrative picture you showed, actually blocking the house behind you from the street, which I think is better. And the amount of space, and this picture is a really good example, actually. In other bigger cities, where my parents live in Chicago, there's not even 6 feet between the houses. The bedroom I sleep in looks right out onto the brick wall of the brownstone next door. So this is more consistent with some patterns of growth in bigger, older cities. So I don't think that this is really a big deal. So I am going to, again, move to grant the certificate of appropriateness, and then back off and see what Mr. Nilsson says. I'd be happy to make a motion and direct staff to approve findings to allow for a historic use variance to vary the side yard setback down to 3.5 feet and take care of the entire thing today.
Mr. Nielsen, can you comment on that?
Sure. Madam Chair, Councilmember Goodman. You are correct. I think one of the paths initially on this situation could have been a historic variance application. I think historically, the way CPED staff has applied the historic variance is in situations where someone in a historic district capacity or in a landmark designated capacity needs a variance to do something that is not one of our authorized variances. And then they perhaps offer this path of a historic variance. When it's a variance that is one of our authorized variances, typically they've made people go through the 2-step process, HPC first and then the Board of Adjustment. I agree that this one, although it doesn't fall within that historic area where they would have offered a historic variance, this one seems ideally suited to that. I agree. There still is a practical difficulties consideration even with a historic variance, but it does allow for a little bit broader considerations, and especially here we have this kind of intermingling of sort of zoning considerations and historic district considerations. This might have been an ideal candidate for that. I get it completely. I don't want to sound like a sort of a spineless bureaucrat type of person, but I think we would still need a historic variance application in front of you to act on it. I don't think you can act by fiat and just approve a historic variance today when there hasn't been any analysis on that as required by statute and ordinance. So I don't know if there's a way we can get there quickly, but I do think you would need, the applicant would need to have that application submitted in order to act on it.
Councilmember Goodman.
I'll accept our attorney's analysis with regard to the process. I first would like the chair to have a vote on the certificate of appropriateness, and then I'll speak to the issue of the historic variance.
Okay. Clerk, could you call the roll on the motion to grant the appeal.
Councilmember Goodman,
Aye.
Andrew Johnson,
Aye.
Barbara Johnson is absent. Reich, Warsami, Chair Bender. That's 5 votes for.
Okay, Councilmember Goodman.
So I see the path forward. I see it's not as quick as I would like, but I respect the fact that we don't want to be making on-the-fly exceptions without something in front of us. I think that would create a legal problem for us going forward. And as preservationists, you probably would agree, we don't want everyone coming in and making an exception if we care about preservation broadly defined. And I don't want this to set precedent for other historic districts, and I'm sure you would agree you wouldn't want that either as preservationists. But I want to make it clear, this committee is looking very favorably upon that variance, and seems to me we would likely grant it. That has nothing to do with how the staff should respond to it or the Board of Adjustment should respond to it, but I think it needs to be made clear in the report that goes to the Board of Adjustment that we asked them to do this and that we want to see it move in this direction. I don't know what the construction timing and schedule is in 2001. All right, now you're back, so yeah, a couple extra weeks probably won't kill you. We found a path for you that I think is pretty clear and gives direction and reinforces the point that everything in this area is non-conforming. Setting a new standard for the future is not a bad thing. If Council Member Warsami wants to work with the community to further clarify how this could be achieved, that's great. But if not, this particular applicant is not going to be held up any further. But I do respect the fact that our attorney has suggested we not just simply grant something not in front of us. And I can't take it that far.
Thank you, Councilmember Goodman. Councilmember Warsami.
I'd like to thank Chair Lisa and as well as Councilmember Goodman on this. She actually said everything that I wanted to say, but I wanted to mention that we have the experts from Milwaukee Avenue here, the people who built Milwaukee Avenue, the people who care about Milwaukee Avenue, the people who defend the historic nature of Milwaukee Avenue are right here. They're the experts. They know how this beautiful part of my ward and part of Seward should stay. And I did like what Sheldon Main said, which is it is a living historic district and people live there. There's actually families there. There's people, who live there, and we need to be very careful with, their needs in terms of how they want to live in their neighborhood. So I thank everybody for coming, and I thank the staff for their hard work as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Warsami. Thanks to Councilmember Goodman for your creative thinking here. I think what you're hearing from our committee is that, we have an absolute desire to support the needs of this community and to allow these changes to go forward. I was concerned about every single property owner in the district having to bounce around to all of these different committees and variances and spending staff time if imagining that this is something that may be desirable for a lot of the property owners. So I think as you achieve this here, whichever way goes forward, I know Councilmember Warsami has said that he's interested in looking at this, and I think I would offer my time as well to support policy changes that might make this easier in the future, that may give some more certainty to property owners that want to do these changes in the future. So thanks for everyone's time being here. Is there any other comment on this issue? Okay, seeing none, that's the close of our agenda, and I'll adjourn the committee. Thank you.